Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Mem Zayin, where two lines from the top says the Gemara. Omar Rav Zera, Omar Rav Asi, Omar Rav Yochanan, Omar Rabbi Chanina. So Rav Zera heard from Rav Asi, who heard from Rabbi Yochanan, heard from Rabbi Chanina. So what did they hear? The following halacha. Omar Rabbi Roimnus. Rabbi Roimnus taught us the following halacha. Li hiti Rebbe allowed me letaltel machta be'efra, to be metaltel, to handle, to move around a machta, a pan which was used for burning incense, be'efra, even though it contained its ashes. Now at this point the Gemara figures that these ashes were not designated from before Shabbos for any constructive purpose, and therefore these ashes are considered to be muktzah machmas gufay. They're utterly useless. And therefore, the machta as well, which is serving as a basis, as a base and as a support for this muktzah item, it too is considered to be muktzah because it is batal, it is subordinate to the muktzah. Therefore, the Gemara wants to know, how come Rebbe allowed him to handle this machta, and why didn't he consider it to be muktzah? Amalei Rav Zera le Rav Asi. Rav Zera was the one who heard the halacha from Rav Asi. So he turned to Rav Asi and he asked him, how can you tell me, the neighbor of Yochanan, that one can go ahead and move around this machta? It should be completely muktzah. One can't move it from its place because it is batal. It is a basis to the efer, which is muktzah machmas gufay. It is a utterly useless item, and the basis as well has the same category. Mi Amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi. Is that so that Rabbi Yochanan taught us this is allowed? V'atanan, we learned in the Mishnah. Noitel adam b'noi va'evan b'yadai. One could lift his child even though his son is holding a stone in his hand. Oy kalkala, or to move around a basket, va'evan b'soicha, although it contains a stone. How is this allowed? V'chayra, these things are considered to be basis l'davar asur. V'amar Rabba Barachana Rav Yochanan, I'll tell you why. We're speaking about b'kalkala malaya piris eskinan, a basket full of fruit, and in this case the fruit is considered to be the primary object in this basket, since it's definitely more valuable than the stone. If so, the basket is considered to be a basis al davar hamutar, and we don't reckon with the stone. Now, what about the child with the stone in his hand? The Gemara there discusses this question and concludes that we're speaking about a child who has intense emotional connection to his father, and he must pick him up, otherwise the son will fall ill. So the Chacham allowed him to pick up his son even though he's holding muktzah. Okay, but getting back to the basket, Rav Yochanan interpreted the Mishnah as discussing a case where the basket contains fruits. It's only because of this fact that the basket contains fruits. That's why the basket is not considered to be a basis of davar asur. But otherwise, if there are no fruit present inside the basket, certainly one cannot handle this basket. It is a muktzah item because it is basis. It is serving as a base, as a support to the davar asur within it, and it is batal to it. It too, it attains the status of the muktzah item that is within it. If so, how could Rav Yochanan teach us that this machta is not considered to be a basis to the efer? It doesn't have the same muktzah status as the efer, as the ashes. Says the Gemara, Ishtoimim k'shah achada. So if Asi was confounded for a moment, he thought it through, and then he responded as follows. V'amar, he said, Hachanami, this big carton. Obviously we're speaking about that this machta, which contained the ashes, also contained granules left over from the incense, and therefore, on account of those granules, on account of those krotin, which are not muktzah, since they can still be used, they have a fragrant smell, they can still be used, and therefore they are certainly more chashuv, more valuable than the ashes contained in the machta and the pan, and we don't consider the pan to be batal to the ashes, rather to the item of higher value, which are the krotin, and therefore the machta as well is considered to be mutter. Now, although the machta is certainly considered to be a klisha malachta l'isser, it is designated to be used for a malacha, to burn incense on it, which is a malacha on Shabbos. Nevertheless, we know that even a kli shemlachta l'isser can be used l'tzarech gufa, l'tzarech mekaymai, if one needs that chayfetz elsewhere for its own sake, to use it for its own function, or he needs the space, the location where this kli is sitting on, so he can move a kli shemlachta l'isser, kli that's designated for isser, can move it for these purposes. However, in this case, where the afer is absolutely useless, it is more than just isser. It is muktzah machmas gufay, because it has no practical function on Shabbos. If so, the machta should not theoretically be allowed to be moved at all on Shabbos. Even l'tzayirach gufay l'tzayirach mekaymai, it should have the same din as the afer, which is muktzah machmas gufay, and cannot be handled whatsoever. Nevertheless, as the Gemara, since there are remnants of this levaina, of these granules of incense inside this machta, if so, this machta is considered to be a basis to the davar hamutar, and can be moved if we need this machta to use it elsewhere for some reason, or to use the place where the machta is standing on. Now it's interesting that the Gemara's kasha here was that how could Rav Yochanan hold that this is mutar? And Rashi explains, since we know that Rav Yochanan follows Shitas Rabbi Yehuda and Muktzah, he adopts this broad approach of Muktzah in accordance with Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Therefore, the afer is considered to be Muktzah. Explains the Marsha, why does Rashi need to focus on Rabbi Yehuda? Say he would hold like Reb Shimon in Muktzah. Nevertheless, this will still be a problem because the afer is utterly useless. It's not just designated for malacha. It has no practical use on Shabbos, unless it was designated before Shabbos to be used to cover with its waste. But otherwise considered to be muktzah machmas gufay, where even Reb Shimon agrees that it's muktzah. Explains the Marsha, there's a difference here. Because according to Reb Shimon, anything which isn't absolutely rejected from Shabbos use is still considered to be mutar. It's not muktzah. Therefore, this afer, since theoretically it can be used to cover waste with it, it wouldn't have a din of muktzah machmas gufay. Therefore, the Gemara's kasha is only because, it's only based on the fact that Rabbi Yochanan adopted Shitas Rabbi Yehuda and Muktzah, and therefore this afer, since its primary designation is not to be used to cover waste, by and large it's useless. Therefore, it's considered to be Muktzah machmas gufay unless he specifically designates it, prepares it from before Shabbos to use it to cover waste. So, going to Rabbi Yehuda, the default here is Muktzah, unless he undoes that default and designates it for Shabbos use. Therefore, the Gemara's kasha is based on the fact that Rav Yochanan concurs with Rav Yehuda. If so, this afer is considered to be completely muktzah machmas gufay, and should prohibit moving around this machta for any reason, because the machta is a basis to the afer. So the Gemara concludes here that the reason why this is allowed, why Rebbe allowed Rebbe Roimnus to be metal to this machta, because it contained those granules of levaina, Rashi says, those incense which are still suitable, which are still usable, lahariach, to smell, Rashi says, and therefore, since they're more valuable than the afer contained in the machta, so we look at the more valuable item and we determine the status of the basis based on the item of higher value. Now, Tosfos asks a kasha. Why was the Gemara basing its kasha on Rav Yochanan's interpretation of the Mishnah, of the basket that contained the stone? We see from Rabbi Yochanan's words that if not for the fact that there were some fruits in there, the basket would be considered a basal davar aser because it contains a stone in it. Says Tosfos, we have a clear-cut Mishnah later on, Daf Kufman Beis, which already teaches us this halacha. When there's money on top of a pillow, the pillow is muktzah. Or when there's a stone on top of a barrel, the barrel is muktzah. So we know the concept of basis al davar aser from a Mishnah. We didn't need to infer it from a halacha of Rabbi Yochanan that implies to us that there's such a concept of basis al davar aser. Says Tosfos, there's a difference here. Perhaps from the Mishnah, I wouldn't know to compare to this halacha of the ephah on the machta. Why? Because money, yeah, it's a davar chashav, it's a item of value, and therefore perhaps that sitting on another item that endows that item, that base, that basis with a din muktzah, because it's not batal. Just the opposite. The basis is batal to the mois. The same thing with regard to the evan al pi hachavis. It says we're speaking about perhaps a evan which is used to close up the mouth of the chavis, and the chavis needs it. The chavis is tzrichala. Therefore, perhaps over there, the stone is not bottled to the chavis. And quite the contrary, we say the chavis, the barrel, is serving as a basis to the stone and is considered to be bottled to the stone. So perhaps specifically in those cases, the money on account of its value, the stone on the chavis on account of its function, is considered to be prominent and important, and therefore the item underneath it is muktzah. It's considered to be secondary and basis to the muktzah. But in our case, where we merely have some ashes or a stone sitting in a basket, who says that will make the basis into muktzah? Therefore, the Gemara brings a raya specifically from Rabbi Yochanan, who told us, yes, even a stone in a basket would render the basket muktzah because it is a basis of davar aser, if not for the fact that there were fruit present in this basket which undo the effect of the stone and are mounted the basket betiltel. Okay, so once again we had a kasha. How is this pan to be moved on Shabbos? Doesn't it have the muktzah in it? The answer is, it also has the granules, the krotin, which are valuable, more valuable than the ashes, and therefore the pan relates to them and is not considered to be muktzah. Amar Abaye, how can you say that on account of these krotin, of these granules, the pan is not muktzah? Now we're speaking about Rabbi Yonus, who was quoting Rebbe. Rebbe, we know, was a Nasi, was the foremost leader of Klal Yisrael. He's a wealthy man, and this, the Gemara assumes, it took place in his house, and the items belonged to him. It says the Gemara, krotin, granules, Bei Rebbe, in the home of Rebbe, who was wealthy. Michashivi, are they considered to be valuable and items of significance, of importance? Certainly not so, and therefore they can't determine the halacha of the machta. The machta who is holding the ashes is considered to be a basis of davar aser, regardless of the fact that there's some remnants of incense in there which are not chashiv, and therefore they can't outweigh the ashes. And certainly we consider the machta to be a basis to the ashes. It's only when the item of heter is more valuable than the item of isser, like in the case of the peiros and the kalkala. In that case, they outweigh the stone. They're considered to be more chashiv and of higher value, and therefore they rule the day. We consider the basis based on the item of higher value. In this case, it says Abai, the krotin are chashiv. They're insignificant. We don't reckon with them. And therefore, certainly the machta relates to the afer and is a basis of davar aser. Now, apparently, the Gemara is assuming that the owner is the one that determines, because the point of basis, as Rashi explains, based on the concept of bittul, the basis is serving the item above it. It's bottled to it. It's secondary to it. It's a tuffle, like a tuffle and ikar by brachos. So here too, it's a tuffle to the muktzah, which is considered to be ikar. Now, who decides? Who decides what's the ikar? So the Gemara assumes that the owner is meant to decide. So if this incident took place in the house of Rebbe, even though it was actually Rabbi Yonus who was trying to move around this machta, this halacha related to him. Nevertheless, the owner is the one that determines the value. And if to Rebbe, who is a wealthy man, these granules are insignificant, he determines the value. He determines the halacha here. And therefore, the machta is considered to be muktzah. As the Gemara will explain, perhaps you'll say, that although to Rebbe it was insignificant, but since it is chazir lanim, it is fit and usable, suitable for a poor man, we look at that, we determine the value of the item based on who's actually using it, who's actually handling it. We don't look at the owner. Says, well, we know that not to be so. V'atani, we learned in the price. Big day aniyim laniyim. Begodim, which are suitable for poor people. There are small patches. Rashi says they're only 3x3 etzbois, or they're made of a thick texture. So these are suitable only for aniyim. Therefore, the Brisa tells us they only makabel tuma for aniyim. Big deal laniyim leaniyim. However, a wealthy man, for him these things carry no chashivas, no significance, and therefore they're not makabel tuma for him. Taisus explains this is specifically to tumas medrus, a specific tuma for where the azav sits on it, but other tumas like tumas meis, Taisus says it would not depend on the fact that it belongs to an ani or usher. So in any case, at least with regard to tumas medrus, we do see this distinction, that something which is suitable and meant for, designated for an ani, will only be makabel tumah for the ani. Again, says the Gemara, big de al niyim la niyim, big de ashir, but if there are large size materials, like Rashi says, 3x3 tefachim, which are suitable to be used even for wealthy people, in that case it is makabel tumah, even for ashir as well. Aval, says the Gemara, but the aniyim, those items which are designated for aniyim, la ashir will not be makabel tumah for the ashir, so a small piece of material, like we mentioned, or the thick texture, which is not suitable for ashirim, will not be makabel tumah for the asher. See, here too, says the Gemara, the fact that the owner, in this case Rebbe, did not assign any significance, any value to these granules, they're not considered to be chashiv, and therefore they cannot outweigh and overpower the ashes which are sitting in this machta, and the machta should be considered to be a basis, l'davar aser, to the ashes. So you can't tell me that was the reason, because of the granules. That wouldn't work. Ella amar Abaye. So Abaye says, okay, I'll give you another reason. Midi dahava agrav shel rei. The reason why he was allowed to move around this machta, it's based on the concept, on the halacha of grav shel rei, this container which contains rei, which is tzoya, waste. So we know that the Chacham allowed one to be metaltel, the graf, this container of rei, since it's repugnant, it's repulsive. The Chachamim made an exception with regard to the lachas of muktzah, although it is muktzah machmas gufay, it's useless, it's muktzah. The Chacham allowed one to handle it, to get it out of the way, on account of its mius. Here too says Abaye, this machta, which contains these ashes, it's moist, it's repugnant, and therefore, for that reason, he was allowed to move it. Omar Rava, shtei tshuvas b'davar. I have two reasons to challenge this teretz. Number one, chada, graf shel rei moist. The graf shel rei, it's moist, it's repugnant. Vayloi moist. This machta is not moist, just because it has some ashes, big deal. That wouldn't be a reason to allow it to be moved. V'oid. Another reason, graf shel rei migli. That vessel, that container of rei, of tzoya, is migli, it's open and revealed, and poses a repulsiveness. It's repugnant because it's visible. But in this case of the machta, it had a lid, it had a perforated lid, and therefore the afer was covered, and it's not considered to be moist. That wouldn't be a reason to allow it to be moved. Ella Amarava, let me suggest a reason why Rebbe allowed Rabbi Ronus to be matal to this machta. I'll give you an answer based on the following incident. Ella Amarava ki avinan bei Rav Nachman. When we were by Rav Nachman, we would do the following. Hava metaltilalinan kanuna agav kitma. We would be metaltil. This kanuna is some other type of pan, which is used to burn coals on it for warmth. So we would be metaltil this pan, this sort of shovel, agav kitma, even though it had the ashes in it. As Rashi explains, agav kitma means not despite its ashes, but because of its ashes, meaning that these ashes were already prepared from before Shabbos and were designated to be used on Shabbos, to cover it, to cover the roi, tzoya, to cover waste with it. So therefore, these ashes were not considered to be muktzah at all. It was miyuchad, it was mezuman for shimush on Shabbos. Therefore, says Rava, that must be the reason for Rebbe allowing Rabbi Ronus to be metal to the machta. We're not speaking about afer that surfaced today, afer that wasn't prepared from before Shabbos. Rather, that afer was prepared before Shabbos. It was designated before Shabbos. His das was to use it on Shabbos. So once something was prepared before Shabbos for use on Shabbos, it doesn't have a status of muktzah. And certainly there's no reason not to be metaltal that machta with its afer. So up until now, we figured out the words of Rabbi Ronus, who said, Li hita Rebbe, on the third line up on top, Li hita Rebbe, Lil taltal machta be'efra. We figured it was despite. He allowed me to be metaltal the machta, despite the fact that it contained some aver, which is muktzah. And that was a pella, that was a wonder. We wanted to know what the pshan that was. Now the teretz is different. The interpretation of those words mean as follows. Li hita Rebbe, Lil taltal. He allowed me to be metaltal machta be'efra, for the sake of its afer, because this afer was designated to be used on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, okay, if so, what's the chiddush here? So the machta is certainly not muktzah because it has the afer in it, and the afer was designated to be used for a shimush heter. So why can't he be metaltal the machta to go ahead and use it to pour the afer? Perhaps the machta is itself would be muktzah because it is a klishah malachta l'isser. It's meant to be used for burning, which is a malacha. But in this case, when he's using it, when he's picking up the machta, the pan, in order to transfer the afer and to use it to cover something with it, why can he do that? What is the chiddush here? Says the Gemara, "Va'afagav the ikaleh shivra eitzim." So this is actually the conclusion of Rava's incident. He said, when we were by Rav Nachman, he would allow us to carry this pan for the sake of its ashes, even though it contained on it shivra eitzim, pieces of splinters of wood, chips of wood, which are muktzah. Nevertheless, since they weren't as valuable as the afer inside, therefore the machta, or this kinuna, this vessel, was not considered to be muktzah. So here too, in our case, once again, we're speaking about afer which was designated before Shabbos. So even though perhaps there's some splinters of wood there which are muktzah, one is allowed to be metaltal the machta on account of its afer. Continues the Gemara Meisvei. How can you say that it can carry this kli, despite the fact that it has some wood chips on it? Vishavan. The Brisa tells us that they're both equal. They all agree. It's referring back to Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Shimon, who have a machlekes between them regarding being metaltal, a ner, a lamp. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's muktzah. According to Rav Shimon, it's not muktzah. They both agree. Shim yesh bo shivrei psila, if it has remnants of wicks, Rashi says psila shel pishton, some flax wicks. So it's asal taltal. Why? Because these shivrei psila, these broken wicks are considered to be items of muktzah, and therefore, even though within the lamp there's also oil, we see that it doesn't matter. The fact that there's some muktzah item there, that renders the lamp to be muktzah. It considers it to be muktzah, since it is serving as a base, as a basis for the shivrei psila. Here too says the Gemara, even though in this machta there's afer, and the afer is not muktzah. Nevertheless, since there's some shivra eitzim there, there's some small pieces of wood there, the machta should be muktzah on account of them. Says Zumar Amar Abaye, I'll tell you the reason why. When it has a shivra psila, it's muktzah. We're speaking about a unique case. Begalila Shana. We're speaking about in the area of Gol of Eretz Yisrael, as Rashi explains the begadim shel pishtan, the flax, the linen, the material was very scarce there, hard to find. Therefore, it's considered to be valuable. And even though there's some oil in this slab, together with the shivrei psila, we consider the shivrei psila to be more valuable than the oil. And therefore, the halacha of basis is dependent on the item of higher value. In this case, the shivrei psila are considered to be more valuable, and therefore the ner is serving as a basis to them and as muktzah. However, in our case, when we have the afer, the ashes in the machta, although there's some wood chips present, the wood chips are not more valuable than the afer. Just the opposite, the afer is more valuable, and therefore the machta is considered to be a basis to the davar heter and may be moved on Shabbos. So in conclusion, we had a halacha that one can be metaltal the machta when it has afer inside. The Gemara was trying to understand what is the basis for this heter. It seems that the afer is muktzah, and the machta as well should be muktzah. So the Gemara had three approaches. We began with Abaye, who told us that evidently we're speaking about there are some krot in this, some granules of incense, and on account of those valuable krotim, which are more valuable than the afer, the machta is considered to be a basis to them, and not to the afer. The Gemara countered by saying, well, these krotim in the home of Rebbe carry no significance, carry no value, and we don't reckon with them. So Abaye proposed that perhaps the reason why it can be metaltal this machta is because of the halacha of graf shorei. The Chacham allowed one to pick up this vessel containing the waste, because of its mius, and therefore even though it should be muktzah, they allowed it. Here too, the machta is moos on account of its afer. Rabbi disagreed, and he concluded that apparently we're speaking about afer, which is not muktzah at all, because it was prepared from before Shabbos to be used for some type of shimush on Shabbos, and therefore the machta, which contains this afer, can be moved in order to pour the afer. And the Gemara concluded that the chiddush here is that although there's some wood chips there, the wood chips are insignificant, are not considered to be as valuable as the afer. Quite the contrary, the afer outweighs them and carry the day and determine the halacha of the machta. Now we see the interesting point that the point of basis, the concept of basis, is based on bittul, that it is considered to be secondary, tafel, subordinate to the item above it. And therefore we see that this concept is determined by the owner. The owner decides, because he is the one to determine the value, the status of the basis. So if to him the item above it is chashiv, is an item of value, then the basis underneath it is batal to that item. He determines. And whether or not he's actually using it with somebody else, the halacha depends on the owner, what value he assigns to these items. Second thing we see, that when we have two items sitting on a basis, what is the status of the basis? It depends on the item of higher value. Because once again, the point is to be mevatel the basis to the object sitting above it. So it is only batal to the object which is more valuable. Continues the Gemara. Levi bar Shmuel ashkechinu. So there was a story that Levi bar Shmuel, he encountered Rabbi Abba and the Ulu Rav Huna bar Chia. He encountered these two. They were standing by the doorstep of Rav Huna. So he encountered them and he asked them a shayla halacha. Amarlu, what is the halacha in the following case? Ma'ula hachsir mita shel tarsim b'Shabbos. So tarsim are either coppersmiths or weavers, and they used to have this portable bed they used to carry with them and assemble it when they got to their destination. Is one allowed to reassemble this mita, which is comprised of sections of parts? Ma'ula hachsir, can one reassemble this mita shel tarsim b'Shabbos? Is it allowed or not? Amr, so they told him, why not? Certainly, shaper dummy, one certainly can go ahead and reassemble this bed. As Tosfos explains, we're speaking about the sections which come together loosely. They're not really tightened, and therefore, it is not a problem. It's not considered to be a malacha on Shabbos. So this was the first part of the story. Continues the Gemara. So Levi bar Shmuel came, also he came like Hamed Rav Yehuda, and he asked him the same shayla. Can one reassemble this type of bed on Shabbos? Omar Rav Yehuda exclaimed, he said as follows: Ha Rav Shmuel damer tavayu. Rav Shmuel both say, Hamachzer mita shel tarsim b'Shabbos chayiv chatas. If one was to reassemble this mita shel tarsim on Shabbos, he actually chayiv chatas. It's a full-fledged malacha. Which malacha? Explains Rashi. It's a malacha of makeh b'patish. This is a term used in the Gemara later. It's the final blow. It's referring to finishing up a utensil, finishing up an item, and it's considered to be a malacha. So reassembling this bed is considered to be makeh b'patish. It is a malacha. Now, Tosfos explains that this statement, this halacha of Rav Shmuel, that if one is machzer the mita shel tarsim, is chayav chatas, is a malacha d'oraisa. Evidently speaking about when he did it, when he assembled the parts very tight, he fitted them together tightly. Indeed, in that case, he's chayav chatas. But in a case where it's merely roughly, the parts, the sections are merely fitted together loosely, certainly in that case, it's not really a malacha d'oraisa, it's not chayav chatas. So why did he compare the two things? How did Rav Yehuda compare the halacha of Rav Shmuel, or speaking about a tightly fitting bed, and our case, which was merely loosely fitting? Tosfos explains that he meant to derive as follows. He says, look, when you fit them tightly, he's chayav chatas. It's a malacha. So it's not plausible to say that when it's loosely fitting, it'll be mutar l'chatchila. It makes more sense that the Chachamim would not allow that either, on account of a possibility that one might confuse the two. One might come and not just fit them loosely, might go ahead and actually put them together tightly fitting, which is a malacha d'oraisa. So it's rational to say that the Chachamim would make a gzera, even in the case when the sections are merely loosely fitted together loosely. So if so, we must say that this case as well is asa, at least midrabanan. So once again, a quick recap. He had a shayla, what about this mita shel tarsim, which is comprised of sections? Can one reassemble it on Shabbos in a loose manner? So the first shita was Rab Abba and Rav Huna bar Chia. They said, sure, no problem. It's merely fitting together loosely. That's not a malach. Rabbi Yehuda says, well, it must be at least asur midrabanan on account of the fact that were he to go ahead and fit them together tightly, firmly, it would be a chiv chatas, it would be malacha deraisa. Certainly it makes sense that roughly, if it's merely loose, it should at least be asur midrabanan. Continues the Gemara Meisvei. We're going to ask a kasha from a brisa on the man Amar who allows hamachzer kana menor b'Shabbos. If one restores the branches of the candelabra on Shabbos, chayiv chatas. Why? Because when he puts back the branch into the candelabra, he's doing it in a firm manner, fits tightly, and continues to be a malacha. However, kana sayodin, this pole used by the plasterers, so they still have a pole made of sections, which they would add to each other or subtract based on the distance, on how far he has to go and reach. So this kana sayodin lo yachser, he shouldn't go ahead and assemble it. But the mixer pater v'lasser. But if he does it, it's not a malacha deraisa, it's pater, although it's certainly asur midrabanan. Why? Because apparently these sections do not fit together tightly, and it's not considered to be a malacha deraisa. Reb Simai Omer, there's a certain type of instrument called a keren agula, a round horn. So this was a perforated instrument, a wind instrument, which had some holes to place the pipes of the instrument. So it depends what type of instrument. If it's a keren agula, a round horn, in that case the pipes which are inserted, the sound emitting pipes which are inserted, go in very firmly and tightly. Indeed, that's a malacha and is chayiv. Keren pshuta, if it's just a straight keren, in that case the pipes that are inserted, they go in loosely, they're loosely fitting pipes, and it's not considered to be a malacha deraisa, it's pater. So you see clearly that even something which is loose fitting is asur midrabanan. So how can we say that to reassemble this mita shatarsim is mutar l'chatchila because he's doing it loosely? This brisa clearly tells us that even if it's loose, it is asur at least midrabanan. Says the Gemara, inu, they, meaning Rab Abba or Rab Huna bar Chiya, who allowed it l'chatchila, they followed a different opinion. Inu de Amar ki Tana. Their shita was based on the following Tana, which was Reb Shimon Gamliel, who indeed allows one to reassemble an item if he does it roughly, loosely. The Tana is related in the following brisa. Mal b'nei samita, these sockets placed underneath the legs of the bed to prevent the molding or the damaging of the legs of the bed. So these sockets which were placed underneath the legs, or karasamita, the actual legs of the bed themselves, levachem shel skivas, a certain type of wooden nut which was used in the bow and arrows. Lo yachser, so one should not put them back, assemble them. V'im yichser pater, but if he did so, he is pater. Avol asur, it's pater. It's not considered to be a malacha deraisa, but certainly midrabanan, he shouldn't do it. Perhaps he may come to actually do it instead of deraisa. V'lo yitka, but he must make sure not to really fasten it tightly. Rashi says through, for instance, through pegs, using pegs or nails, because if he was to do so, if he actually is teikeya, he's actually fastening with a chayzik, with firmness, using, for instance, pegs or nails. So this brisa contends that merely assembling items together is not a malacha deraisa unless he actually is doing it b'chayzik, very firmly, and fasten them together, for instance, using pegs or nails. This is Tanakama. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, if it's loosely fitting sections, he can even do it l'chatchila. Apparently, the fact that he's allowing it to remain loose appears that he's not really concerned with the firmness and fastening it. There's no concern that he'll go ahead and drill nails into it, drill screws, and fasten it very tightly. So this shita, Rav Shimon Gamliel, forms the basis for the heter applied by Rab Abba or Rav Huna bar Chiya. They maintained that this mita shatarsim, this bed made of sections, can be reassembled if, in fact, he makes sure to do it in a way which it's loose. The sections are loosely fitting. And according to the shita of Gamliel, Rav Shimon Gamliel. Continues the Gemara. Bei Rav Chama. So on the home of Rav Chama, have a mita gal nisa. There was this portable bed. Have a mahadrula. They would reassemble b'yoyim tov on Yom Tiv. So So one of the scholars challenged Rava, and some have the Gersa of Rav Chama. He challenged Rav Chama. How can you allow this to take place in your home? My daitach. What are you thinking? What is the heter? So he said, my daitach, what is your opinion to be mad to this? Why are you allowing it? Binyamin atzadu? Because it's not the ordinary manner in which one builds. It's being done roughly, loose, and therefore it's not considered to be a malacha. Binyamin atzadu? Nihidi isur deraisa leka. Although certainly it's not isur deraisa. Isur derabbanan mihika. However, the Rabbanan disallow this. I'm concerned that he might go ahead and actually fasten it tightly and use screws or nails. Omar Leis, he told him, I hold like Rav Shimon Gamliel, who says the Omar, if these sections are loose, it's mutter even l'chatchila. Therefore, I allow this to take place in my home. So in summary, we have a three-way machlekes here with regards to assembling an item on Shabbos. Now we have several types of assemblages. We have rafui, which means that the sections are merely loosely fitting. We have einei rafi, when they're firm, when they're tightly fitting, and we have takul b'chayzik, very tight. For instance, using pegs or nails. And we have a three-way machlekes here. The first brisa tells us that even when the sections are merely fitting loosely together, it's rafui, it's still asur midrabanan. When they're fitted tightly together, einei rafi or takul b'chayzik, very tight, certainly that's considered to be a malacha and chayav chatas. In the second brisa, we have a machlokes. The Tanna Kama holds that when it's either loose, rafui, or even when they're tightly fitting, it's merely asur midrabanan, provided it's not takul b'chayzik. They're not really very tightly fitted together, for instance, using pegs or nails. Only in that case is there a chayav chatas. Rav Shimon Gamliel disagrees with the first halacha. He says, if it's merely rafui, loose, then it is mutter even l'chatchila. The Gemara concluded that Rav and Shmuel based their prohibition with regards to assembling the mita shel tarsiyim. They based their isser on the first brisa, who holds that even when he assembles it in a loose manner, it's still asur midrabanan. However, the other shita of Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna bar Chiya, they based their heter on the opinion of Rav Shimon Gamliel, who maintains that assembling an item in a manner where these sections are merely loosely fitting rafui, it is mutter even l'chatchila. Continues the Mishnah. One may place a kli under a lamp to deflect the sparks. However, you shouldn't place water into it. Why? Because it's extinguishing the flames, extinguishing the sparks that fall directly into the water. Says the Gemara, how can one place a kli under the ner to deflect the sparks? He's being mavatal the use of the kli. He's nullifying the designation of the kli because these sparks are muktzah. And when one places the kli under these sparks, what happens to the kli? It becomes a bastus of davar asur. It is batal to the sparks, and it too becomes muktzah. And one cannot be mavatal the use and designation of a kli on Shabbos. We learned this earlier. There are several reasons. On account of soiser, it appears as though he is dismantling the kli, he's rendering it useless. Or on account of boina, it appears as though he is cementing the kli into place, he won't be able to move it any longer. So this is isur midrabanan, and one should not be able to do this on Shabbos. Amar Avuna b'Rav Yeshua, this is different. In our case, the kli doesn't become muktzah at all. Needs soitzis, ein ber mamish. Sparks have no significance, they have no value. And therefore, even when the sparks are present in the kli doesn't become muktzah. And why is this? As we explained earlier, Rashi told us that the concept of basis of davar asur is based on the halacha of bittul, because the base, the support becomes batal, becomes nullified to the muktzah item within it. In the case of nitzotzes, they're not items of significance, they have no chashivas. So even though perhaps they themselves are muktzah, but they don't make the kli a basis to them. The kli doesn't become batal to something so insignificant as sparks. So, in conclusion, there's no concept of bittul kli meichana here, because the kli remains mutter throughout. Continues the Gemara. So the Mishnah told us water cannot be placed in this kli because it's going to extinguish the sparks. Says the Gemara, extinguish? It's being done indirectly. It's a gram. It's not direct kibui. He's not being machaba directly. He's placing water, and eventually the sparks become extinguished on their own. It's merely a gram kibui. He's doing it indirectly. Is that too asr? Lema, you're going to say Tanan, stomach of Yossi. This Mishnah, this Stam Mishnah, this anonymous Mishnah is based on Rav Yossi Shita. Reflects Rav Yossi's opinion, who says the Omar Gorim the Kibi Asr, one cannot even indirectly cause kiboy of a flame. This is a machlekes discussed later in the Masechta. That if there's a dleika, if there's a fire there, and he wants to prevent it from spreading, according to Rav Yossi, one may not place water inside new earthenware kalim, which are liable to crack and burst when the flame gets to them. So you can't place them around the flame, because even gram kiboy is asr. Is this mission reflecting that shita and not the shita's Rabbanan who allowed that to happen? Says more of a Tizbra. Can you even propose? Does that make sense? That our Mishnah reflects Rav Yossi's shita? That doesn't even work. Why? Because Eimadam Rav Yossi b'Shabbos. Rav Yossi's halacha is only with regard to Shabbos itself. One cannot place those kalim there on Shabbos itself because he's doing Geram Kiboy. However, in our Mishnah, which is discussing Erev Shabbos, that certainly would be mut even called Rav Yossi. Erev Shabbos miyamar. Does Rav Yossi then state his Isser even on Erev Shabbos? So you can't even say that our Mishnah is following Rav Yossi. Even according to Rav Yossi, this would be mut. Perhaps you'll say that our Mishnah is discussing Shabbos itself and not Erev Shabbos, and indeed it's reflecting Rav Yossi's shita. V'atani, we learned in the Brisa, nois and kli tachas haner lekabel nitzotzes b'Shabbos. One may place a kli under the ner to be makabel the sparks. On Shabbos itself, he can do that. Erev Shabbos, and needless to say, on Erev Shabbos, certainly can do it on Erev Shabbos. That's with regard to an empty kli. However, but he shouldn't place water into this kli because he is extinguishing the sparks. He can't even do this Erev Shabbos, even if he places it before Shabbos. Needless to say, on Shabbos itself, that's asr. So if our Mishnah is discussing even Isser Erev Shabbos, that won't even fit with Rav Yossi's din. There must be a different reason for the halacha in our Mishnah. Elam Rav Ashi, I'll tell you the reason. Afilu Teim Rabbanan, even if our Mishnah is following, reflecting Shittas Rabbanan, who allow one to do gram kivu on Shabbos, one may place those earthenware kalim around a fire, even if they may burst when the fire gets to them. Our Mishnah is reflecting even Shittas Rabbanan. So why in this case is it asr? Why can't he place the water in the kli? Shani Yacha, this is different. Because he's bringing closer the time of kiboy, meaning he's preparing it for a direct kiboy. As Mepharshim explained, there's a concern that perhaps he's going to put, while he's pouring the water in this kli on Shabbos, these sparks will arrive, and it turns out that he's actually actively extinguishing the sparks with his own hands, not just a gram kiboy. Therefore, that would be a malacha. Or, for instance, if he's placing the kli there on Shabbos and he's lifting it right under the ner, so at that point when the spark hits the water, he's actually being mechaber with his own hands. So on account of this concern, Chachamim disallowed this. They answered from putting the kli with water for concern that it might actually bring to kiboy, direct kiboy, which is a melacha d'oraisa. Therefore, the Brisa tells us not only on Shabbos itself, even on Erev Shabbos, he cannot do so for concern that he might actually do it on Shabbos, and then he might come to do direct kibbutz. This is asakash. We don't find this type of issa anywhere else. For instance, a person may set up a trap in Erev Shabbos to trap animals. There's no concern that he might do that on Shabbos itself. So why is this different? Says there is a difference. Because by an ordinary malacha like the malacha of trapping, there's no reason, no basis to suspect that anybody's going to do the malacha of trapping on Shabbos. However, in this case, with the water and the kli, there is a concern because it doesn't really appear to the ordinary person like he's doing a malacha. He's merely placing water there, he's placing a kli there. It's not an obvious malacha. So there's a real concern that a person might not realize, and just as he does it Erev Shabbos, to extinguish those sparks that will fall into this water, he might do it on Shabbos itself. And on Shabbos, there's a concern that while he's pouring the water, while he's placing the kli, it might take a direct kibui. A direct malach of kibui might take place. Now Tosfos points out, so how do we understand the common practice of placing water in a glass container and having the oil float on top of it? Why is this different? When the flame gets to the water, it goes out, extinguishes through the water. So he's doing the same thing as in the Mishnah. He's placing water near a flame. It should be asur. There's a concern perhaps that he might go ahead and do kibbutz biyadayim. So why is this allowed? So Tosfos is a big difference, because in that case, he's not involving himself in extinguishing any sparks. He's merely trying to lift the oil. So he places a little water underneath, so the oil gets lifted and goes to the top of the kli, and the flame is up on top. He'd like it to be that way. So the point here is not that he's doing any kibbutz. He's not involved in extinguishing any sparks, any flames. So indeed, there's no concern here that will go ahead and do anything that relates to kibbutz. The Rosh adds another point that, factually speaking, there actually is no gram kibbutz at all, because with or without the water, the flame lasts just as long. It's going to burn down to the bottom until it consumes the whole entire supply of oil, and that's it. So even if there's no water there, the flame goes out. So by placing water there, he's not actually expediting any kibbutz. He's not involved in doing any kibbutz whatsoever. There's no concern that on account of allowing him to do this, he might go ahead and place the kli there, as in the case in the Mishnah, and put out the sparks. One doesn't relate to the other. This is not a malacha. This is not a maisa of gram kibbutz at all, and therefore it has no relation to the halacha in our Mishnah. Hadron alach kira. Continues the Mishnah. What type of materials can one use to insulate, to wrap a pot, and what cannot be used for wrapping? Now, until now we learned that halacha of shehiyah, placing an item, having a pot remain on a stove and an oven throughout Shabbos. Now we're going to discuss the halacha of atmana. So one would like to take his warm pot and insulate it, cover it up, wrap it with some sort of material to maintain its heat throughout Shabbos. As we learned earlier in the Masechta, there are actually two categories of atmana. One is mi ba'odyim and one is mishach hashecha. On Shabbos itself, mishach hashecha, one cannot wrap a pot with any type of material. Why? Because there's a concern that he might find his pot has already cooled off, and he might not be too happy about that, and go ahead and rewarm it on Shabbos. Therefore, the Chachamim prohibited one from being matman on Shabbos itself. He can't take the warm pot and wrap it on Shabbos with any type of material. However, on Erev Shabbos, that is allowed, provided that it uses materials which are not moisef hevel, which don't emit any heat. Why is that? Because if you were to use materials that are moisef hevel, there's a concern that he might use afer, ashes, which contain in them coals. And what's wrong with that? Because he might go ahead on Shabbos and stir those coals to generate some more heat and maintain the heat of his food. So therefore, this is going to be our Mishnah, which will give us the classification, the categories of what is considered to be moisef hevel and whatnot. But what can one use? What type of material can one use for atmana on Erev Shabbos? These type of materials that are not moisef hevel. What type of materials are moisef hevel and cannot be used for atmana? Says the Mishnah, one cannot wrap like begefes, using this pulp of something which was squeezed for its oil. The Gemara soon will explain, we're speaking about olives or sesames. V'lei bezevel, manure, v'lei b'melach, salt, v'lei b'sid, type of plaster. V'lei b'choil, sand, bein lachem, bein yivation. Whether these things are moist or wet, they are moisef hevel and cannot be used for atmana. V'lei b'tevim, straw, v'lei b'zagin, pulp from squeezed grapes. V'lei b'muchen, some type of rags. Rashi says any soft material like rags or cotton balls, etc. V'lei ba'azav, and grass. B'zman shein lachem. There's only concern when they're moist. At that point, they're moisef hevel. Avo toinu behem, one can use them kshem yivation when they're dry. Now Tosfos points out, Pirush Rav Yosef b'Shem Rav Shmuel, that this discussion of being matman b'davar hamoisef hevel, which is asur, is only when this food is not considered to be machal ben dersoy. But if this food was cooked, machal ben dersoy, which means a third cooked, just as shehiyah is allowed, one can place it over a stove with exposed coals. There's no concern of shemiyachata, because it's already somewhat edible. Here too, this shita will hold that one can wrap this food with this pot, even using material which is moisef hevel. Because what's the point of moisef hevel? Why is it asa? Because he might use ashes and he might go and stir those coals. But if this food is already a third cooked, there's no concern that he'll go ahead and stir those coals to expedite the cooking process. It's already edible, as is. Now Rabbi Tam disagrees with it. He says there's a big difference between hatmana that we're discussing here and shehiyah. Shehiyah is allowed when the item is already at least a third cooked. Says Rabbi Tam, why? Because Shehiyah is speaking about that the pot is sitting up on the stove and it's up in the air. V'sholat be'avira, the air is affecting it, the cold air is affecting it, and therefore a little bit of stirring of the coals won't really help it out too much. Therefore, there's no concern that will stir the coals. However, by Hatmana, where it's wrapped, and he's trying to maintain the heat through the wrapping, in this case, as a tam, a little bit stirring of the coals will enhance the heat there, will increase the heat, since the item is wrapped. So there is a real concern of Shamichata, even when the food is already third cooked. The Rosh adds another point. He says that food which is left sitting on the stove, shehiyah, is generally intended for the night meal. Therefore, there's another reason another reason to mitigate the concern that since it's going to be used soon for the meal, there's less reason to think that it's going to be mechat to stir the coals. But something which was wrapped, hatmana, evidently he's intending on using it for tomorrow's meal. In that case, there's more of a reason of concern that he'll go ahead and stir the coals to maintain its heat for tomorrow. Okay, continues the Gemara. Iboilu. We have a question as far as definition. What does the Mishnah mean when it says gefes? Gefes, this type of pulp, is moisav hevel. Is it gefes shal zeisim tnan? Is the Mishnah listing gefes of olives, of pressed olives? Or avodah shumshimin shapradami? But the pulp of crushed sesames are okay. So only the gefes shal zeisim, which Rashi says were piled up together, and they generate heat, since they're konos yachad gathered together, v'chamoid very hot. But the shumshim that are gathered together don't generate so much heat. Oidilma the shumshim nan. The Mishnah is discussing shumshim and the crushed sesames. They too are considered to be a item which generates heat, a large degree of heat, and are considered to be meisav hevel. The koshkin, the zeisim, certainly the pulp of zeisim. Says the Gemara Tashma, I'll bring you a riot. The Omer Rav Zera Mishum Chad Rav Yanai. Rav Zera quoted in the name of one of the Chachamim in the Beis Medrash of Yanai as follows: Kupa shetoman ba. If one wrapped his pot using permitted material like rags, etc., so you place it into a kupa, into a basket, into a box. Also lahanicha al gefesh al zeisim. You cannot take this entire kupa, this entire contraption, and place it on top of the zeisim pulp, because the heat emanating from the zeisim are affecting the temperature of the pot contained inside the skupa, and therefore it has a status of hatmana bedavar hamoisiv hevel, and it's also says about the fact that he relates to the gefes as gefes shal zeisim. Apparently, that's a raya to the definition of gefes in our Mishnah as well. Shema Mino, we hear from here shal zeisim tonight that the gefes described in our Mishnah is of the olives. Says no. Truthfully, I'll tell you, with regards to wrapping and insulating, the shumshimin ami aser, even if he uses the pulp of shumshimin, that too is considered to be meisav hevel and it's aser. This case, this halacha, was describing a slightly different type of scenario. We're describing a kupa which contains the pot within it, which was placed on top of the gefesh al zeisim. Now we need the heat to radiate upwards. In that case, we say that only the gefesh al zeisim has that ability. Le'inin hasuki havla, in order to radiate heat upwards. The zeisim maski havla, only pulp of olives are hot enough to do that. The shumshimin loy maski havla, pulp of sesame don't have that ability to radiate upwards. So therefore, Rav Zera quoted the halacha with regards to gefesh al zeisim, because in that case, certainly only the gefesh al zeisim have the ability to heat up the pot which is in the kupa above the zeisim. But with regard to ordinary atmana, as discussed in our Mishnah, perhaps even the gefesh al shumshim are considered to be meisav hevel, and is considered to be a forbidden item. Okay, time for a brief chazara on today's daf. We began with a halacha that one may be metal to a machta that has ashes in it. More as a kasha, the ashes are muktzah, they're utterly useless. The machta should be considered to be a basis, a base to this muktzah ash, and should be considered a muktzah as well. Says Abaye, we're speaking about there are granules in there. Says the more granules to Rebbe, insignificant. They carry no value. Says Abaye, okay, the reason is because of graf shalrei. It's repulsive, and therefore he can move it even if it's muktzah. Rava says, well, this is not really graf shalrei, it's not really mos, and it's also covered. Says Rava, I'll tell you the reason is because this afer, these ashes were prepared from yesterday to be used on Shabbos, and therefore they're not even muktzah. We're speaking about there's some wood chips there, nevertheless, since they're not as valuable as the afer, they're nullified, and the machta is considered to be forming a basis for the afer, which is mutter. The Gemara proceeded with the halacha of assembling items that are comprised of sections and parts. The Gemara told us regarding a mita shel tarsim, a weaver, or some say it's a coppersmith's bed, which is portable, it has many sections, and he puts it together in a loose manner, roughly. Is that mutter or asr? We have a machlekes. Rav and Shmuel say it's asr, and they base their shita on the brisa, which tells us. The first brisa which tells us that even roughly is asr. According to Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna bar Chia, this case is mutter, and they base their opinion on Rav Shimon Gamliel, who holds that as long as the sections are merely loosely fitted together, it is mutter even with Rabbanan. The Gemara proceeded with two halachas with regards to a lamp. One may place a kli underneath to be mekabel the nitzoytze, deflect those sparks, as long as the kli doesn't have water in it. Otherwise, it's also there's a concern that he might go ahead and do the malach of kiboy on Shabbos. The Mishnah proceeded with the halach of atmana. So if he wants to be matman, wrap, insulate a pot before Shabbos, he may use materials that are not moisav hevel, but materials that add heat, that generate heat, that emit heat, that he cannot use because there's a concern that he might use afer, which contains coals, and he might go ahead and stir those coals on Shabbos with machata b'gecholim. Now there's a point that Taisus makes with regard to atmana, which may be pertinent to some of us today who use the crock pots on Shabbos. Taisus says that the concept of atmana is only when he is matmin umadbik saviv hakadera, when he actually places the insulation flush to the pot. However, if there's some aver, some air, there's an air gap between the insulation and the pot, that is not considered to be atmana, but rather it's merely considered to be shehiyah. So according to some shitas, today's crock pot, which is covered on all sides with the walls of the crock pot, so we have the container which contains the food inside and surrounded by this additional wall, this aluminum metal wall surrounding it. So according to some shitas, is that considered to be atmana? So the best way to get around that is to create an air gap, an avir bein atfanis lekadera. So it can simply be done by raising the container inside, placing some, for instance, some balls of silver foil to raise the container, thereby creating a air gap, airspace underneath and also around the sides of the container which contain the food. So by doing so, he's distancing somewhat the outer walls of the crockpot from the actual container. And according to Taisus' words, that's not considered to be atmana, but davar hamaisiv hevel.